So as you saw from that clip, you can hit tens of trillions of damage in singular hits with the Druid on the Season 10 PTR, and this scaling is primarily coming from one of the new Chaos perks. And if this isn't changed when we go into the launch of Season 10, Druid will just have the strongest build of the season, because this build mixed with this new perk is absolutely insane. I'm sure it's going to get changed, but it is really interesting how this is actually working. And while this perk is giving you those absurd damage numbers, there's not many builds that will actually be able to trigger this effect in this way. I think this is probably the only build. This is also a perk specific Druid, so it seems like there's probably only one build in the game that can actually do this, and this is using the Great Staff of the Crone for a Stormclaw Druid build, where now Claw will also cast a Storm Strike, and then you build fully into basic skills and attack speed. So anytime you use a Claw, it can proc a bunch of different Storm Strikes, and Claw can proc multiple times, and you're not using any Spirit in this build, so you're technically just generating absurd amounts of Spirit every time you attack. And this is how you're going to generate these crazy numbers with this perk, and the perk is Overabundance, which is actually one of the magic chaos perks. And this reads that every 50 Spirit you generate above your maximum increases your damage by 20% and is multiplicative for 5 seconds. This bonus stacks, so it has infinite potential stacks, but does not refresh. So if I go get one stack, then get another, that first one's duration does not refresh up to 5 seconds. But because we're using a build that does not use any Spirit and can generate ungodly amounts of Spirit, we are just getting potentially like hundreds of these stacks. I don't know the actual number because there's nowhere that actually tracks this, but based upon the damage scaling we're getting, it's absurd amounts, and based upon how much Spirit you actually generate in a singular hit when this build is all put together, we're getting a ridiculous amount of stacks. In fact, I think with one hit of Claw in this full build, we get around 130 Spirit, and that isn't with like additional procs of Storm Strike or Claw, which can hit multiple times. That's essentially the base level. So the base lowest amount you can be generating is basically 130 Spirit per hit, and we can hit very quickly, and we're stacking up more attack speed, and you can get additional procs of those to basically multiply how much Spirit you're generating. And as you can imagine, those damage stacks come in pretty quickly. And because we're not looking to fill up our Spirit, we're specifically looking to just generate Spirit above our maximum. There's actually a couple different pieces that can help you do that. First off, in the Druid skill tree, you have Abundance, which basic skills generate a bunch of additional Spirit. With this build fully how it is right now, I have 75% more Spirit, which is absurd considering how many different procs of basic skills we're using. So this helps you scale to an absurd degree. And then one of the legendary aspects that we would always be using anyway is adaptability, which gives us more basic skill damage just based upon our primary resource, but it also gives you that basic skills generate 5 additional primary resource once per skill. And keep in mind, when you cast Claw, it also does a Storm Strike, so you're just generating a ton of additional Spirit just off of this legendary aspect as well. That's how we're basically able to fill up the entirety of our Spirit globe in a single Claw use. And just with this build right now, which this build isn't best in slot by any means on the PTR. In fact, I think you would be changing up a lot of different things to get more use out of this if this went live like this. But even just with that, I don't think there's anything in the game that can actually last super long against this build. I think even in like pit 150 runs, I think you would get to the point where you would just start like insta-killing most of the enemies near you after you stacked it up a little bit. Because once you go against, say, all these boss training dummies, you hit a few times, you're not doing a bunch of damage, and then you'll just see it just starts to basically insta-kill all of the health of these enemies. And this isn't even with any of my other scaling. With this build specifically, that was without Grisly Rage scaling, that was without any of the other passive stacking we have, without the extra damage from Bloodhowl. So that was like hundreds of % less multiplicative damage scaling. That was just walking up to something and auto attacking them. And you're already hitting in like 700, 800 billion trillion hits, and that's every single hit in a build that has some of the fastest attacking in the game already. So it's pretty much a guarantee that this perk is going to be nerfed, and I do think that this perk was probably designed almost specifically around the Stormclaw Druid or something close to that. In fact, in some previous seasons, they've actually done things that almost specifically seem to be for Stormclaw Druids, but Stormclaw Druids have never been kind of that upper echelon. So I think they've wanted to make a build like this an actual top tier build. And while this does this, I don't think this is going to go live like this. There's a few ways they can nerf this. They can massively reduce the actual damage increases you get. And I think they may not end up doing that, because if there are any other builds that can actually make use of this as well, like maybe there's some build you actually spend spirit, but you can generate so much you actually get some use out of this. It would basically become useless if they massively reduce the damage. So in my opinion, they will probably limit how many stacks of this you can have and just keep not making them refresh. Like maybe they'll put like a 20 stack limit on this or something, which would still be absurd and would still help a Stormclaw Druid become incredibly strong. But I don't think this is going to stay in the game with how strong it is. As you've seen, this will just end up one-shotting everything in the game pretty quickly. But if you want to jump on the PTR and just test this out and see how fun it is, I would definitely recommend checking it out. It is really fun, and you probably won't get an opportunity to try out a build like this that is just this strong anytime soon. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.